Sir Keir Starmer talked today of building a European coalition of the willing. We will examine tonight what that might look like. Also on News at 10. MAGA is not yet America in its entirety, so what did the rest of the US think of Trump and Vance's behavior in the Oval Office and their apparent alignment with Vladimir Putin? If we can't rely on the US or on NATO anymore, is Europe in any position to defend itself, and what would it take? Also tonight, Israel blocks aid into Gaza as Hamas refuses to accept new proposals on the release of hostages. And Nina is on the red carpet for the final countdown to the Oscars with an open field for the top prize.
Who knows, it could be The Brutalist, it could be Wicked, it could be Anora. It's very, very exciting because it's just never been so close.
This is ITV News with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. It has been a week none of us is likely to forget. A week that ended with those deeply disturbing images of the leader of the free world and his deputy humiliating the man who has been fighting to keep at bay a hostile invader. The situation was perhaps best summed up by the Kremlin itself, which said the new administration is rapidly changing all foreign policy configurations. This largely coincides with our vision. What now seems obvious to all of us is that a new era has dawned and the US has other priorities than the war in Ukraine and even indeed the defence of Europe. Gathering European leaders in London to work out what they do next, Keir Starmer called it a crossroads in history. He promised to develop a coalition of the willing. It sounded a lot like a coalition without the United States.
After the soap operatic bust-up between President Trump and President Zelensky on Friday, Keir Starmer wants to secure our future by convening European and international leaders in Lancaster House in London. The French President, the Italian PM, leaders of NATO and the European Union. And then the war leader, all here to see if they can secure peace in Ukraine and something else important.
Can you save your relationship with President Trump?
The emergency summit started with Starmer pledging personal support to Ukraine and said all the leaders around the table were with Zelensky. 2.5 hours later, he confirmed that he and France's President Macron will be the bridge between Zelensky and Trump.
We've agreed that the UK, France and others will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting. Then we'll discuss that plan with the United States.
And then the bullet points of consensus.
First, we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia. Second, we agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security. Third, in the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defensive capabilities. Fourth, we will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. This effort must have strong US backing.
With your commitment in the event of a peace deal to deploy British soldiers to Ukraine, is there now a more real prospect of Britain being at war with Russia? Can you rule that out?
I want stability in the United Kingdom. The way to ensure that stability is to ensure that we are able to defend a deal in Ukraine, because the one thing our history tells us is that if there is conflict in Europe, it will wash up on our shores.
This is Europe's fight, said the EU president.
It's basically turning Ukraine into a steeled porcupine that is indigestible for potential invaders.
And what level of spending should individual countries make to defence?
One thing is very sure, we have to have a surge in defence. We really have to step up massively.
On defence spending, Also today at the table, I heard new announcements, and I'm not going to announce them to you because they should do this.
So, talking done for now, but the European leaders' caravan will continue on to Brussels on Thursday, where we'll hear from them how much they're stepping up their defence spending. And then, shortly after that, for Starmer, it'll be back to Washington, back to see Donald Trump again. Zelensky, in one of our choppers, confident that Europe, at least, has his back. Unlike the US president, King Charles didn't feel disrespected by Zelensky's preference for casual wear. Robert Peston, ITV News.
Well, as we saw there, Sir Keir Starmer is clearly hoping to bridge the gap between the US and Ukraine. But the more we hear from officials on both sides of the Atlantic, the clearer it becomes that uniting two sides with such frankly divergent views on how to end the war will be a monumental challenge, to put it mildly, as our US correspondent Dan Rivers reports.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying.
After the diplomatic storm, the cleanup.
Low-end soldiers. It would be a damn good.
Or the attempt at least to repair the damage.
Ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire.
From the most explosive White House press appearance in history.
You're gambling with World War III.
What is that we need a very radical reset.
Today, Britain's man in Washington tried his best to put talks back on track.
It takes both the United States and Ukraine to come together and make sure that this whole initiative is given the best possible likelihood of success, because, George, it is the only show in town.
Mr. President, is there no...
After President Zelensky was kicked out of the White House, members of President Trump's cabinet went on TV today to underline how much damage had been done.
This has created a huge rift in the relationship. President Zelensky, as you pointed out in the clips that you played, doesn't believe that he did anything wrong and that there was no issue with what he brought up in the Oval Office with President Trump. There's going to have to be a rebuilding of any kind of interest in good faith negotiations.
And that's what Zelensky did, unfortunately, is he found every opportunity to try to Ukraine-splain on every issue. Then he confronts the vice president. When the vice president says the goal here is diplomacy, he immediately jumps in and challenges the vice president.
You didn't have our military equipment.
But there were plenty ready to blame Donald Trump.
It is absolutely shameful what is happening right now. The White House has become an arm of the Kremlin.
It was a sad day for our country. It was a dumpster fire of diplomacy.
Millions of Americans are embarrassed, are ashamed.
As Ukraine endured more Russian attacks this weekend, some in Kyiv were praising the British initiative to heal the rift.
American support is vital. We can't lose the United States. We need to heal this division.
The deal on Ukraine's minerals has been floated as an opening step towards a wider peace, but it's still not clear if Russia would engage.
There's a good chance that UK and France could put together some proposals, can get Ukrainians sign up to them, and then can sell them in Washington to the president and his advisors. I think the key question here, the one that none of us can answer is it then going to be possible to strike a deal with Russia?
3 years into this conflict, Ukraine's fate may rest with the support of Britain and Europe, not America. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Washington.
Well, those scenes in the White House may have been a great shock to many, but they have arguably been coming a long time. Whenever one thinks of Donald Trump, his worldview, or even his apparent bond with Vladimir Putin, he does often ask a tricky question, which in this case is, why should American taxpayers pay for Europe's defence? And if they didn't, and we did have to go on our own, where do we actually stand militarily? Well, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, Russia has amassed a total of around 3.1 million troops and reservists. NATO has more than 700,000 troops on its eastern flank, while more than 100,000 US military personnel are deployed in Europe, with around 200,000 reservists available to deploy if called upon. This means without the US, there would be a deficit of around 300,000 troops, not to mention the loss of the US's vast arsenal of weaponry. Well, with me in the studio are Emma and Robert, and we're also going to speak to Dan in Washington to try and make sense of what has been, I think we all agree, a shocking and potentially history-making first few days. Emma, can I start with you? President Zelensky's just been speaking, so can you bring us up to date with what he's been saying?
Yeah, some interesting points coming out from his conversation, as Dan said, just before he left the UK. Probably the top line of note is the fact that it seems there is the proposal now on the table for a 1-month ceasefire. That's something that's being proposed by the UK and France. It's basically a ceasefire when it comes to the air and the sea attacks. It wouldn't be a ceasefire on the ground. So that's quite a confusing initial report on it. But it is an attempt to try and bring some kind of peace to the situation, or at least a stabilising and calming of the situation. President Zelensky was asked about that and whether he was aware of it. He said he was aware of everything, but wouldn't get into it. And he has once again reiterated his wish for a strong Ukrainian army, of the need for European support, and his hope that there will be ongoing US support.
If there isn't, if Ukraine has to exist with only the support of Europe, is it survivable from Ukraine's point of view? You've often reported from the front line. Do you think it's survivable, or is it all over if the Americans pull out?
It's an awful lot more difficult and potentially catastrophic for Ukraine. I think they could keep on fighting for a period of time. There will be a lag in terms of the stopping of US military support, because there's some already in the pipeline and that will be coming through. Obviously, there is very significant amounts of support coming from the EU and the UK. That will remain, and that will probably get beefed up. But there's no doubt they will be fighting a much more difficult battle with a lot less actual military support than they've had already. I think it would make it a more difficult war, and it would mean that they were not able to fight for as long. And I think that the one thing that's come out of today is the need for Europe to increase its defence spending, for it to really bolster what it can provide for Europe and also for Ukraine.
OK, Dan, I guess one question that people will have this weekend, I think many British people were profoundly shocked by what they saw on Friday, partly because of the way that Donald Trump and JD Vance treated a guy who's been trying to repel an invasion on his country, but also because of the sense that something quite fundamental was changing in terms of what we've all grown up with, really. What has been the reaction more broadly in America?
Well, firstly, the reaction from the administration here, I mean, they're briefing different sources in the US media that they want a public apology from President Zelensky before they can go forward with any kind of signing of a minerals deal or anything broader. So that's going to be a very difficult pill for him to swallow if he is willing to do that. In terms of the broader public reaction, well, look, it divides as the country divides politically here, right down the middle. There'll be many, in the MAGA base who will have been cheering on what happened in the Oval Office on Friday night. That question from one of the right-wing reporters who was invited into the Oval Office asking President Zelensky why he wasn't wearing a suit, will have struck a chord. The feeling that President Zelensky wasn't being deferential or respectful enough to President Trump. But there will be plenty more in the centre and on the left who will be really revolted by what they saw, some of whom will have voted for President Trump, perhaps through gritted teeth, who now are experiencing buyer's remorse. And I think if you look at what's going on in Vermont this weekend today, there have been big protests in Vermont, and that's because JD Vance is there skiing with his family. Hundreds of people have lined the streets in sub-zero temperatures to make their feelings known, to the point that JD Vance's family has had to be moved to an undisclosed location. So there is very real visceral anger from some parts of American society.
OK, Robert, let's come to you at the end here to sum up. Keir Starmer is clearly desperately trying to keep America on board. Where do you think we are as we go into a new week with that?
So, one very important point before I get into that, which is we saw something historic and important at Lancaster House today, where I was, and what I observed was a new solidarity between the leaders of Europe to massively ramp up their defence spending and to pull together, for the first time since the Cold War, to see off the kind of threat that Putin poses to our security. The problem is it will take something like 3 years to ramp up essentially both conventional forces, new technology, to rearm. Right now, we absolutely need American support if there is a peace deal and we are going to be able to preserve the peace. Keir Starmer's made it absolutely clear British troops' lives will not be risked. They will not go into Ukraine unless President Trump provides a security guarantee. That security guarantee would consist of air cover, intelligence, access to precious American technology. They believe in Downing Street that Trump will, once he recognizes that Europe has changed and is doing what he wants. He has said he wants Europe to spend more, take more responsibility for their own protection. That is what Europe is doing. As I say, it was dramatic, it was important. They believe that when he sees that, and, you know, some people think he's a narcissist, and Trump says, look, you were right, look, we're doing it for you, that he will then come around. Second point, you just heard from Emma about Zelensky's statements tonight. He also said he would sign that minerals deal potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars to America, gives America property in Ukraine. Again, if you talk to senior people in the British government, they believe he will give the security protection once American property is at risk, which would be the case after Zelensky signs away these precious resources.
OK. Thank you all, and you can hear plenty more on this issue from Dan, from Emma and from Robert and I in an extended conversation on the ITV News YouTube page and on ITVX. We had it recorded a short time ago, and I personally found it a fascinating series of reflections from these three venerable experts on what has been quite a history-making weekend. Now, in other news, Israel was today accused of using starvation as a weapon after it blocked the entry of food and other aid supplies in Gaza, as Sejal Karia reports.
Lorries line up with life-saving cargo just meters from the Gaza border, where the need for it is desperate. Within sight, but agonizingly out of reach. Israel cutting off all aid until, it says, Hamas agrees to a US plan to extend the ceasefire.
In light of Hamas's rejection of the US suggested framework, we decided the entry of goods and supplies into Gaza will be prevented. Hamas is currently taking control of all supplies and is turning the aid into a terrorist budget directed against us. We will not agree to this in any way.
For Fatima Al-Absi, every day is a struggle to survive at Jabalia refugee camp, to find enough food for hungry mouths.
We don't want war, we want peace and security, and for all countries to stand with us. We are afraid that the war will return again.
Fears echoed in the local markets too, where there is food now, but many ask for how much longer.
The crossings are the means by which people obtain the basic necessities of life. Why are they closing them? For the extension of the truce, they must find another solution.
And as hundreds sat down together to break the first fast of the holy month of Ramadan, there are fears this fragile ceasefire could come to a shattering end, while Hamas has accused Israel of what it called cheap blackmail by blockading aid. The Egyptian foreign minister, a key mediator in the conflict, has condemned Israel.
The use of aid as a weapon of collective punishment and starvation must not, cannot or should not be allowed or accepted.
Tonight in Gaza, the future once again looks uncertain. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
The film industry's awards season reaches its grand finale tonight on Hollywood Boulevard at the Oscars. There are plenty of British hopefuls in the mix, and Nina is there as they all arrive. Nina, it feels pretty exciting this year with everything potentially up for grabs, no?
Yeah,
Yeah, there should be some surprises. For a start, there are plenty of people walking down this busy red carpet now that might have thought that the Oscars wouldn't make it this far at all because of the LA fires. But I've seen so many LA firefighters on this carpet now. There's going to be a tribute to them and to the community and, of course, to the late, great Gene Hackman. Now, when it comes to the films, the competition is wide open. We don't have a big juggernaut like Oppenheimer that's going to sweep through and win absolutely everything. We're expecting lots and lots of British actors in front and behind the camera to walk down this red carpet because the Brits are involved in some of the biggest films of the year.
It is almost time.
The supervision of this election. This is a duty I never thought I'd have to perform.
The film about the election of a fictional pope in Vatican City has been recognised across several categories. Its Oscar-nominated production designer revelling in the chance to be creative.
We weren't restricted by tradition or by what reality says happens in a conclave. No one really knows what happens behind the scenes, and that was music to our ears because then we can recreate that, we can invent that. We finished this film 2 years ago, and you don't make a film for the awards. They're just an icing on the cake.
The Best Actress category, with Britain's Cynthia Erivo from Wicked in the running, is perhaps the most difficult to call. Demi Moore, who stars in The Substance, could cap a 5 decades-long career with a glorious Oscar win. But rather than a comeback, will it be an arrival story instead, if newcomer Mikey Madison wins out for Anora, announcing herself as a major new talent? Perhaps the most extraordinary story would come from a win by Fernanda Torres in I'm Still Here. Only 2 actresses from Brazil have ever had an Oscar nomination. The first was her mother, Fernanda Montenegro, 25 years ago. Both their films set against Brazil's turbulent political climate, and both directed by the same man, whose film has a further 2 Oscar nominations.
They tell a lot about the resistance of art in Brazil. You know, the fact that even against totalitarian regimes, art has endured in Brazil. And those 2 extraordinary women, Fernanda Montenegro and Fernanda Torres, embody that.
Because you are pretty.
Like Oppenheimer last year, Emilia Perez has 13 nominations. No other non-English language film has ever had so many. But after a successful start to awards season, offensive tweets made by its lead actress Carla Sofia Gascon may have harmed its chances.
It's unusual, even for you.
The Brutalist, a British co-production, has 10 nominations, including 1 for the UK's Felicity Jones.
How's my favourite pooch?
And they will be on the red carpet today, but can Wallace and Gromit net Aardman Animation's an astonishing 5th Oscar? Comedian Conan O'Brien is hosting the finale of awards season. The stage is set. Nina Nanar, ITV News in Hollywood.
Indeed it is, and you can watch our full coverage of the Oscars here on ITV right after this programme. You won't have to move an inch. Now, finally, Manchester United's defence of the FA Cup came to an end today. The 13 times winners were knocked out by Fulham in a penalty shootout at Old Trafford after the match had finished 1-1. United's final kick was saved. Fulham, who have never won a major trophy, are through to the quarter-finals. And that is all we have time for tonight. Oh, there we go. That's a Brighton match, which I should be telling you about, and I didn't have time. That is it. Good night. Thank you for watching.
It's Oscars night, so dig out your tux, don your finest gown and join me, Jonathan Ross, in just a few minutes as we go live to Hollywood for the 97th Academy Awards. Elle O'Silly-Wood, Jason Isaacs and Mariella Frostropper here to cover all the red carpet action, the winning speeches and the big moments. That's Oscars Live, coming up after the break.
Today, expect to see some heavy downpours all over the country. Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Hello again. The weekend ending on a bright note for many of us, with some nice sunshine around today across England and Wales at least. Fairly settled conditions for all of the UK over the next couple of days or so. Temperatures are on the up by day, but it continues to feel quite chilly overnight with frost and fog forming. And certainly across central and southern parts of England and Wales over the next few hours with clear skies, it's likely temperatures will fall away. -2, -3 away from towns, frosty and in a few spots foggy before dawn, with more cloud for northern England, Scotland and patchy rain and drizzle over the next few hours, as well as that temperatures steered away from freezing before dawn. Monday will start on a cold, frosty note for England and Wales. Lots of lovely sunshine around. More cloud and patchy drizzle for the Pennines, northern England. A little bit of mistiness and fog there. But in general, for Scotland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales, tomorrow afternoon it will be fine and dry, with the best of the sunshine for southern and eastern areas and feeling fairly mild. Bye-bye.
Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
I know I will die today, killed